The flash of 100 cameras can be a weapon. For Seraphina Monroe bathed in their blinding light on the steps of the Met, it was a coronation. She stood on the arm of billionaire Marcus Thorne, a diamond collar glittering at her throat, her crimson dress a slash of victory against the New York night. The whispers followed her like a train. She was the woman who had finally toppled a dynasty. Across the grand hall, Catherine Davenport Thorne, the wife she had displaced, stood alone, a ghost in pale silk. Everyone saw a woman defeated, a relic of a bygone era. They thought they were watching the end of a chapter. They had no idea they were about to witness the burning of the entire book. What they mistook for surrender was the quiet, chilling calm before a storm of perfectly orchestrated devastation. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a curated museum of a life Catherine Davenport Thorne no longer recognized. It was a space of cool marble, vast panes of glass and art, chosen for its investment value rather than its soul. For 10 years this had been the backdrop of her marriage to Marcus Thorne, a man whose ambition burned so brightly it scorched everything it touched, including she now knew her. The discovery hadn't been a dramatic, tear-soaked confrontation. There was no lipstick on a collar or a late-night confession. It was far colder, far more insulting than that. It was an itemized receipt from Van Cleef and Arpels, mistakenly emailed to their shared household account by an overzealous assistant. The purchase, the Constellation d'Or necklace, a breathtaking cascade of sapphires and diamonds. The date of purchase, her own 10th wedding anniversary. The recipient listed on the discreet gift note request, for my supernova S. Catherine had stared at the email for a full 10 minutes, her coffee growing cold beside her. There was no shock, no gut-wrenching sob. The emotion that washed over her was a profound Arctic stillness. It was the chilling clarity of a mathematician solving a final complex equation. All the variables, the late nights at the office, the sudden business trips to Monaco, the scent of a strange, cloying perfume. On his suits, they all clicked into place. The S was undoubtedly Seraphina Monroe, the relentlessly ambitious senior vice president from their rival firm, Sterling Hale. A woman whose photograph seemed to be perpetually splashed across society pages, her smile as sharp and predatory as her ambition. Marcus had been careless, or more accurately, he had become so arrogant, so assured of his own invincibility and her quiet, dignified compliance, that he no longer saw the need for care. He saw Catherine not as his partner, but as another one of his acquisitions, beautiful pedigreed and reliably inert. She was a Davenport, after all. Her family's name was etched into the cornerstones of half the city's cultural institutions. Davenports didn't make scenes. They endured. They maintained appearances. They smoothed over scandals with quiet, powerful phone calls and checks written with fountain pens. That evening when Marcus came home, he was buoyant, smelling of expensive scotch and victory. He'd just closed a hostile takeover, a brutal corporate maneuver that had left hundreds jobless but had sent Thorne Capital's stock soaring. He dropped his briefcase by the door and loosened his tie, his eyes sweeping the room, barely registering her presence. "Catherine, you should have seen them," he boomed, pouring himself a drink. The board at Omnicorp folded like a cheap suit. "We'll strip their assets and sell the IP by Q4. It's a masterpiece." She watched him from her seat in the living area, the city lights twinkling behind her, like a galaxy of indifferent stars. She held a book in her lap, her finger marking her page. "That's wonderful, dear," she said, her voice perfectly level. It was the same voice she used to discuss caterers or gallery acquisitions. He finally looked at her, a flicker of something annoyance in his eyes. He expected effusive praise, adoration for his genius. He got placid contentment. Just wonderful. It's revolutionary. It solidifies our position for the next decade. Of course, you are always revolutionary, she replied, the words tasting like ash. She didn't ask where he'd been. She didn't mention the necklace. To do so would be to engage in a tawdry, predictable drama. It would be a fight over a man. And as the cold realization settled deeper into her bones, Catherine understood she wasn't interested in fighting for the man. The man was a lost cause, a hollow vessel of ego and appetite. No, she was interested in something far more fundamental. She was interested in justice. Not the messy, emotional kind, but a precise architectural dismantling. Marcus had built his empire using her family's name as his foundation and her inheritance as his seed capital. He had leveraged her connections, her social standing and her quiet dignity to give his ruthless ambition a veneer of respectability. He thought he owned the house. He had forgotten who owned the land it was built on. That night, she lay in their cavernous bedroom, the space between them in the king-sized bed, a frozen chasm. He slept the sound, untroubled sleep of a predator full from a kill. She lay awake, the city's hum, a low thrum in her ears, and she began to plan. Her first thought was divorce, a clean break. Take her half, which by law was substantial, and disappear. But that felt like a retreat. It would leave him with his empire, his reputation largely intact, and his supernova Serafina installed in her place. It would be a footnote in the Marcus Thorne story, the amicable split, the gracious first wife. She refused to be a footnote in her own life. Her second thought was exposure. The media would feast on a story like this. The titan of industry, his brilliant, beautiful mistress, and the scorned blue-blood wife. But that was messy, undignified. It would drag her own name through the mud, and the Davenport name was something she cherished, a legacy of quiet philanthropy and cultural stewardship she had a duty to protect. Then the third path began to emerge sharp and clear in the pre-dawn light. It wasn't about leaving him or exposing him. It was about taking back what was hers. Not just the money, but the power he had co-opted. It was about showing him and the world that fawned over him that a foundation, when cracked, brings the entire skyscraper crashing down. She rose from the bed, padding silently across the cold floor to her private study. The room was her sanctuary, lined with first-edition novels and art history tomes. It was the one space in the penthouse that was truly hers. She sat at her mahogany desk, opened her laptop, and began to type. She didn't search for divorce lawyers. She started with a deep dive into the initial public offering of Thorne Capital 10 years ago. She pulled up the original incorporation documents, the seed funding agreements, the clauses and sub-clauses her own family lawyers had insisted upon, clauses Marcus had dismissed at the time as sentimental trifles from her father. He thought her world was art charity and luncheon menus. He had forgotten she had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with a dual degree in finance and art history before dedicating her life to his ascent. He had forgotten that her quietness was not vacancy, but observation. As the sun began to cast long shadows across the city, Catherine Davenport Thorne was not weeping for her lost marriage. She was drafting a blueprint. It was a plan not of emotional revenge, but of corporate demolition. And the first step was to understand the enemy, not just her husband, but the woman who sought to replace her. She opened a new browser tab and typed Seraphina Monroe into the search bar. The screen filled with images of a sharp, raven-haired woman with eyes that glittered with ambition. Catherine studied her, not as a rival, but as a liability. And every great demolition begins by identifying the weakest point in the structure. In the weeks that followed, Catherine transformed. On the surface, she was the epitome of the dutiful, elegant wife. She hosted a dinner for the museum board, her smile never faltering as Marcus held court at the head of the table. She attended the opera clad in Dior, her posture impeccable. She played her part so perfectly that even Marcus, in his self-absorbed bubble, noticed nothing amiss. He saw only what he wanted to see, the status quo, the beautiful, placid wife who managed his social life with quiet efficiency. But beneath this serene facade, a different Catherine was operating. Her days became a meticulous campaign of information warfare. Her first call was not to a divorce attorney, but to Eleanor Vance, her oldest friend, and a partner at a discreet, powerful law firm specializing in forensic accounting and corporate litigation. They met not in a sterile office, but in the tranquil, sun-dappled courtyard of the Frick collection. He's not just cheating, Elle. He's arrogant, Catherine said, her voice a low murmur that didn't carry past their small table. And arrogance gets sloppy. Eleanor, a woman with sharp eyes and a mind to match, stirred her tea. Sloppy how personal expenses on the company card? That's garden variety infidelity, Kath. We can bleed him dry in a settlement, but it won't bring down the company. It's more than that, Catherine insisted. She slid a thin file across the table. It contained the Van Cleef & Arpels receipt and printouts of Marcus's corporate travel expenses for the past year. Look at the dates. A trip to the Cayman Islands for a fintech conference that doesn't exist. A week in Zurich for a shareholder meeting that was actually a video conference. Millions in unvetted expenses, all signed off under a discretionary fund he controls. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents. This is, bold. He's using a corporate slush fund as his personal piggy bank. Who's his CFO? He must be signing off on this. Gregory Abernathy, Catherine said. Old guard. He was my father's man at the bank for 20 years before Marcus poached him. Gregory hates Marcus's methods. He thinks he's a reckless gambler, but he's loyal to a fault and terrified of being put out to pasture. So Abernathy is our weak link, Eleanor surmised. We need to give him a reason to value his own integrity more than his loyalty to Marcus. That became Catherine's next project. She didn't approach Gregory Abernathy directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, she moved through her world of charity boards and benefit committees, a world where the wives and daughters of the city's most powerful men traded information like currency. At a luncheon for the New York Public Library, she found herself seated next to Abernathy's wife, a nervous, bird-like woman named Patricia. Catherine was charm personified. She inquired about Patricia's garden, praised her taste in jewelry, and then, with surgical precision, turned the conversation to the future. It must be so reassuring, Catherine said, her voice laced with admiration, to have a husband like Gregory. So steady, so principled. In this volatile market, a man's reputation is everything, isn't it? I know Marcus relies on him completely to keep things immaculate. She watched as the word immaculate landed. A flicker of anxiety in Patricia's eyes, a slight tightening of her mouth. Catherine had planted a seed of doubt. She knew Patricia would go home and recount the conversation to her husband. She would ask for reassurance. And Gregory, a man of conscience already straining under the weight of Marcus's creative accounting, would feel another turn of the screw. Simultaneously, Catherine began her reconnaissance on Seraphina Monroe. She learned that Seraphina had clawed her way up from nothing, fueled by a ferocious need for validation. Her ambition was not just for wealth, but for status. She didn't just want to be rich. She wanted to be respected, to be admired, to be seen in the circles that had once been closed to her. Catherine understood this kind of hunger, and she knew how to exploit it. The opportunity came in the form of a small, exclusive gallery opening in Chelsea. Catherine knew from her sources, the ever-whispering network of socialites, that Seraphina would be there, a guest of a new tech billionaire. Marcus was in London. It was the perfect stage. Catherine arrived looking like a work of art herself, in a simple but exquisitely cut navy blue dress that spoke of quiet generational wealth. She moved through the room, with grace greeting acquaintances, her eyes scanning for her target. She found Seraphina holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by a small group of admirers, laughing a little too loudly. Instead of avoiding her, Catherine walked directly towards her. The small group fell silent as she approached, a palpable tension filling the air. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the confrontation between the wife and the mistress. Seraphina's smile froze for a fraction of a second before reforming harder and brighter than before. "Catherine," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "What a surprise to see you here." Catherine smiled back, a genuine warm smile that was utterly disarming. "Seraphina, I've been wanting to meet you properly. Marcus speaks so highly of your work at Sterling Hale. He says you're the sharpest mind in the business." The directness of it, the utter lack of hostility, threw Seraphina completely off balance. This wasn't the weeping, hysterical wife she had imagined. This was a woman of supreme confidence. "He's generous," Seraphina stammered. "He's a good judge of talent," Catherine continued, her eyes sweeping over Seraphina's dress, her jewelry with an appraiser's subtle glance. "And you have marvelous taste. That bracelet is stunning." She didn't wait for a reply. She placed a gentle proprietary hand on Seraphina's arm, as if they were old friends, and steered her towards the main exhibit. "You must come and see the new sterling ruby piece. I think you'd appreciate it. It's so aggressive." For the next 10 minutes, Catherine held Seraphina captive in a conversation about art philanthropy and the pressures of public life. She was gracious, intelligent, and utterly in control. She treated Seraphina not as a rival, but as an equal, a contemporary. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. By refusing to acknowledge the affair, she stripped Seraphina of her power. Seraphina had cast herself as the victor in a dramatic love triangle, but Catherine was refusing to play her part as the victim. As the conversation wound down, Catherine delivered her masterstroke. "You know," she said, as if the thought had just occurred to her, "the annual Children's Foundation charity night is in a few weeks. It's my main philanthropic project for the year. The theme is Celestial Bodies. It's always the biggest event of the season. I'd love for you to come. As my guest, of course." Seraphina was stunned into silence. An invitation from the wife to her own flagship charity event. It was either an act of incredible naivety or a power move of breathtaking audacity. Seraphina, blinded by her own ego, chose to believe it was the former. She saw it as a sign of surrender. The wife was accepting the inevitable, trying to manage the transition with dignity. "I'd be honored, Catherine Seraphina, said, her smile returning this time, filled with genuine triumph. "Wonderful." Catherine replied, her own smile serene. "I'll have my assistant send over the invitation. I look forward to seeing you there." With that, Catherine turned and walked away, leaving Serafina basking in what she believed was her victory. She didn't see the glacial cold in Catherine's eyes. The invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a summons. Catherine was not just inviting her rival to a party. She was setting the stage, positioning the actors, and ensuring the spotlight would be perfectly placed for the final devastating act. And Serafina, in her hubris, was walking willingly into the trap. The weeks leading up to the Charity Night Gala were a masterclass in deception. Catherine moved with the serene grace of a chess grandmaster, arranging her pieces on the board, while her opponent saw only a harmless decorative game. Her focus was now twofold, arming her legal strategy and baiting the trap for Serafina. Eleanor Vance worked in the shadows, her team of forensic accountants digging into the labyrinthine shell corporations and offshore accounts Marcus had set up. They followed the money trail from the discretionary fund at Thorn Capital, confirming it led not to legitimate business investments, but to luxury apartments, private jets, and a string of extravagant gifts for Serafina. But Eleanor needed more. She needed an insider. She needed Gregory Abernathy. Catherine orchestrated the next move with painstaking care. Through a mutual acquaintance on the board of the Philharmonic, she learned that Gregory's only son had been rejected from his first-choice university's elite business program. She also knew that a substantial donation from the Davenport Family Trust could secure a dean's discretionary admission. She arranged a chance encounter with Gregory at a quiet alumni event. Standing beneath a portrait of her great-grandfather, a founding benefactor of the university, she spoke to him not of business, but of family. "Gregory Farr, I was so sorry to hear about William's application." She began, her tone one of genuine sympathy. "He's a brilliant young man. Sometimes these admissions committees are so opaque." Abernathy, a man perpetually stooped by the weight of his secrets, looked weary. "It was a disappointment, yes. He worked so hard. My father always said that true potential shouldn't be thwarted by bureaucracy." Catherine continued gently. "The Davenport Trust has always maintained a fund for exceptional students who might be overlooked. I would be happy to put in a word with the dean to have William's application reconsidered for a discretionary placement. No fuss, no fanfare. Just a quiet word." It was not a bribe. It was an act of grace offered from a position of immense power. It was also an unbreakable bond of obligation. She was offering him his son's future. Gregory Abernathy understood the unspoken price. His eyes, for the first time in years, met hers, with a flicker of his old, principled self. He saw not the boss's wife, but his old mentor's daughter. "Catherine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, Gregory," she replied softly. "Just think about what kind of world we want our children to inherit. One built on integrity, or one built on sand." She gave his arm a light squeeze and walked away. 2 days later, a heavily encrypted file arrived in Eleanor Vance's inbox. It was a digital copy of Abernathy's private ledger, the real one detailing every illegal transfer Marcus had ever made, complete, with routing numbers and destination accounts. It was the smoking gun. With the financial weapon secured, Catherine turned her attention to the psychological one, Serafina. Serafina had embraced her role as the victor with gusto. She was now a fixture at Marcus's side, her presence at society events a blatant declaration of her status. The gossip columns were alight with speculation about the imminent demise of the Thorn marriage. Serafina revelled in it, each whispered comment a testament to her triumph. Catherine, playing the part of the magnanimous, slightly heartbroken wife, decided to give Serafina a gift, a peace offering, a token of her acceptance. She knew Serafina's weakness was not just for money, but for the story that came with it. She craved symbols of her victory. She invited Serafina to lunch at La Grenouille, a place of old-world charm and even older money. It was Catherine's territory, a place where the waiters had known her since she was a girl. Serafina arrived 5 minutes late, dressed in a sharply tailored bright fuchsia suit, a deliberate splash of modern aggression in the classic floral-filled dining room. Catherine, in contrast, was elegance personified in cream-colored silk. Serafina. "Thank you for coming," Catherine said with a warm smile. "Of course. I'm always happy to make time," Serafina replied, a hint of condescension in her tone, as if she were doing Catherine a favor. The lunch was a delicate dance of veiled insults and saccharine compliments. Serafina spoke of her latest business successes, of her and Marcus's plans to vacation in St. Bart's. Catherine listened patiently, nodding and smiling, her calm demeanor a source of visible frustration for Serafina, who was trying to elicit a reaction, a crack in the perfect facade. Finally, as coffee was served, Catherine produced a flat velvet box from her handbag. "I wanted to give you something," she said, pushing it across the table. A gesture of goodwill. Serafina's eyes lit up with greedy curiosity. She opened the box. Lying on the white satin lining was a stunning necklace. It wasn't the ostentatious Constellation d'Or Marcus had bought her. This was something different. It was a vintage piece, a web of platinum and antique-cut diamonds, intricate and breathtakingly beautiful. It radiated history and class. "It's beautiful," Serafina breathed, genuinely impressed. "It's called the Queen's Gambit," Catherine said softly. It was a Davenport family heirloom. It said to bring its wearer great fortune and success in all her endeavors. I feel its time with my family has passed. It belongs to a new era now, to someone bold and brilliant. It would look perfect on you at the gala." Serafina was speechless. This was the ultimate trophy. Not just a piece of jewelry, but a piece of the Davenport legacy. Catherine was not just abdicating. She was handing over the crown jewels. In her mind, the symbolism was intoxicating. The old queen was anointing the new one. Catherine, "I'm overwhelmed," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Please think nothing of it," Catherine replied. "Wear it in good health. I'll see you on Saturday." Serafina left the lunch, walking on air, the velvet box clutched in her hand like a scepter. She was so blinded by her victory, she failed to see the trap for what it was. She didn't know that the necklace was not, in fact, a Davenport heirloom. Catherine had commissioned a private jeweler to create it weeks ago. More importantly, she had paid for it using a very specific method. She had transferred funds from her own personal trust into a temporary holding account and then used that account to make the purchase. But the final crucial step was done through Eleanor. Eleanor's team had fabricated a paper trail, a set of flawless forgeries, making it appear as though the necklace had been purchased by a shell corporation based in Panama, a shell corporation that Gregory Abernathy's secret ledger proved was a primary vehicle for Marcus to embezzle funds from Thorn Capital. The necklace was a Trojan horse. It was beautiful, desirable, a symbol of everything Serafina wanted. And she was about to wear it proudly into the heart of the city's elite, a glittering diamond-studded confession of her complicity in Marcus Thorne's crimes. Catherine had handed her the rope, and Serafina was joyfully tying her own noose. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. Bathed in hues of midnight blue and silver, the Great Hall was a galaxy of New York's most powerful figures. Crystal stars hung from the soaring ceilings, and tables were adorned with constellations of white orchids. The theme Celestial Bodies was fitting for a night that promised drama of astronomical proportions. The air itself crackled with anticipation, the low hum of gossip, a constant undercurrent to the string quartet's melody. Everyone was there to see one thing, the public collision of the Thorne-Davenport universe. Serafina Monroe made her entrance precisely at the peak of the arrivals, ensuring maximum impact. She was a vision in a custom-made Balenciaga gown of blood-red satin that clung to her like a second skin. On her arm was Marcus Thorne, looking smug and triumphant in a classic tuxedo. But all eyes were on the necklace. The Queen's gambit glittered at her throat, a web of captured starlight. It was a bold, unmistakable statement. She wasn't just the other woman. She was the successor. The diamonds were her crown, and this gala was her coronation. They moved through the crowd as a unit of power flash bulbs, popping the whispers following in their wake. "Can you believe the audacity," one socialite murmured behind her fan, "to wear her diamonds to her event?" Another replied with a delicious shudder. Serafina heard it all, and she drank it in like champagne. Their shock was her validation. Marcus, for his part, was oblivious to the nuances. He saw only the overt display of power. He had his brilliant, beautiful new partner on his arm, a woman who matched his own ruthless energy. He was at the top of his game, the king of his universe, and this night was a celebration of his own success. Then Catherine arrived. She entered not with a bang, but with a hush. She came alone. She wore a gown of pale, ethereal silver silk that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She wore no significant jewelry, save for a pair of simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She looked serene, poised, and utterly untouchable. If Serafina was a fiery comet, Catherine was the calm, distant moon possessed of a gravitational pull all her own. She didn't look at Marcus or Serafina. She moved through the room with a quiet grace, greeting her guests a word for the mayor here, a shared laugh with a museum benefactor there. She was the host, the chairwoman of the event, and she radiated an authority that had nothing to do with the man she was married to. It was an authority that came from legacy, from respect, from a name that had built this city. The contrast was stark and unsettling. Serafina's power was loud, new, and desperate to be seen. Catherine's was quiet, ancient, and absolute. The dinner preceded a magnificent affair of lobster filet mignon and speeches about the importance of funding children's art programs. Marcus and Serafina were seated at the head table, a place of honor Catherine herself had arranged. From her own seat at a nearby table flanked by loyal friends and board members, she watched them. She watched Serafina preen under the attention, her hand frequently going to the necklace at her throat. She watched Marcus lean in and whisper in Serafina's ear, the picture of a man besotted. He didn't look at Catherine once. It was the ultimate public dismissal. Finally, it was time for the main event of the evening, the live auction. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a theatrical flair, sold off luxury vacations, hair wines, and private art commissions, raising millions for the foundation. As the auction wound down, The auctioneer paused. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise final item on the docket. A truly magnificent, one-of-a-kind donation. But for this, I'd like to invite our esteemed chairwoman, Catherine Davenport Thorne, to the stage. A polite, slightly curious applause rippled through the hall. Catherine rose from her seat and moved towards the stage, a single spotlight following her. The room fell silent. What was this? A final heartfelt plea for donations? A gracious thank you. Catherine reached the podium. She looked out over the sea of faces, her gaze calm and steady. She didn't look at Marcus. Not yet. Good evening, she said, her clear, cultured voice carrying through the vast space without a hint of tremor. Thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight. Your contributions will change the lives of thousands of children, and for that, I am profoundly grateful. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. For our final offering of the night, she continued, I am not auctioning a vacation or a piece of art. I am auctioning something far more valuable. I am auctioning a story. A confused murmur went through the crowd. It's a story about value. Catherine explained, her eyes now sweeping the room, finally landing on the head table. She looked directly at Serafina. It's about how we determine what something is truly worth. Take, for example, a beautiful necklace. One might assume its value lies in its carats, its clarity, its craftsmanship. But sometimes its true value lies in its provenance, its story, where it came from. Serafina's hand instinctively flew to the Queen's gambit at her throat. A flicker of unease crossed her face. Marcus shifted in his seat, a frown beginning to form. My husband, Catherine, said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, drawing every person in the room into her confidence, is a man who understands value. Or so he thinks. He has built an empire, Thorne Capital, on the principle of aggressive acquisition. Taking what he wants, no matter the cost. The room was now utterly still. You could hear a pin drop. This was no longer a charity speech. It was a reckoning. He believes he is a self-made man. Catherine went on, her gaze now locking onto Marcus, cold and hard as steel. He seems to have forgotten that Thorne Capital was built on a foundation of Davenport seed money, that its credibility was secured by my family's name, and that its most profitable technology, the very algorithm that drives its success, is protected by a patent held not by Thorne Capital, but by a small private tech subsidiary. She let that sink in. Then she delivered the blow. A subsidiary that was quietly placed in my personal protected trust as a wedding gift from my father 10 years ago. A collective gasp went through the hall. Marcus's face went white. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. And so for tonight's final auction item, Catherine announced, her voice ringing with newfound power. I am auctioning off my 100% controlling interest in that subsidiary, and with it the patent to Thorne Capital's core technology. We'll open the bidding at $50 million, though I have it on good authority that Mr. Harrison from Sterling Hale, Marcus's biggest competitor, is prepared to go much, much higher. She smiled, a thin, chilling smile. Happy bidding. The silence that followed Catherine's announcement was not empty. It was a vacuum, dense and heavy, sucking all the air and warmth from the grand hall. For a full 5 seconds, the 200 most powerful people in New York City were frozen, a tableau of stunned disbelief. Jaws were literally agape. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Then the vacuum collapsed, and chaos erupted. A low roar of whispers, gasps, and frantic murmurs swept through the room like a wildfire. People were turning to their neighbors, their faces masks of shock and delicious scandal. On the dais, the auctioneer looked utterly bewildered, unsure if this was part of the show. But all eyes were drawn to the head table, where the drama was playing out in its purest, most brutal form. Marcus Thorne looked as though he had been turned to stone. The color had drained from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes fixed on Catherine with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. It was the look of a king who had just watched his throne get dismantled before his very eyes. The empire he had built, his identity, his entire world, she had just put it on the auction block. Beside him, Seraphina Monroe was experiencing a different kind of horror. Her triumphant smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of confusion and rising panic. The necklace, her trophy, suddenly felt like a lead weight, a cold, heavy manacle around her throat. She was a brilliant woman, a shark in the corporate world, and her mind was racing, trying to process the implications. A subsidiary. A patent. This was no lover's quarrel. This was a corporate execution. Catherine remained at the podium, a figure of absolute calm amidst the storm she had unleashed. She didn't gloat. She simply watched, her expression unreadable as the consequences of her actions rippled outwards. "Do I have an opening bid?" she asked the stunned auctioneer, her voice cutting through the din with icy precision. A man at a table near the front, a well-known corporate raider, slowly raised his paddle. Then another. Then a third. Mr. Harrison of Sterling Hale, a man whose rivalry with Marcus was legendary. Derry was on his phone, his face grim but excited. The scent of blood was in the water, and the sharks were beginning to circle. It was then that Catherine delivered the coup de grace. "And one more thing," she said, her voice once again commanding the room's full attention. "As part of my restructuring, my legal team this evening has filed a comprehensive report with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office. If Marcus had been pale before, he was now translucent." The report. Catherine continued, her eyes never leaving her husband's details, a pattern of significant financial misconduct at Thorne Capital. Specifically, the embezzlement of shareholder funds through a series of offshore shell corporations, funds used not for business development, but for a rather lavish personal lifestyle. She then turned her gaze slowly and deliberately to Seraphina. Funds used to purchase private jet charters, penthouses, and of course jewelry, like that exquisite one-of-a-kind necklace you are wearing tonight, Seraphina. The Queen's Gambit, purchased for over $2 million from a Panamanian account directly linked to the embezzled funds. I have the receipts. The gasp this time was sharp, unified. Every eye in the room darted from Catherine to Seraphina and back again. The necklace was no longer just a symbol of adultery. It was evidence. Seraphina was not just the mistress. She was the recipient of stolen goods, a co-conspirator in a federal crime. Seraphina's hand flew to her neck, not to caress the diamonds, but to claw at them as if they were suddenly burning her skin. The color drained from her face, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. The cameras that had so lovingly captured her triumphant entrance were now documenting her utter humiliation. The flashes were no longer a coronation. They were an interrogation. Marcus finally broke from his paralysis. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over with a loud clatter. "Catherine," he roared, his voice a raw, wounded sound. "This is a private matter. You have no idea what you're doing." "On the contrary, Marcus," Catherine replied, her voice dangerously soft, yet carrying to every corner of the hall. For the first time in 10 years, I know exactly what I'm doing. I am protecting my family's legacy. I am protecting my assets. And I am cleaning house. She turned to the auctioneer. I believe the bidding has commenced. Please carry on. And with that, she descended the stage, not with the frantic energy of a woman who had just dropped a bomb, but with the measured, deliberate steps of a queen reclaiming her kingdom. She did not look back at the wreckage she had created. The social fabric of the evening had been shredded. The auction was a chaotic farce, with bids flying as lawyers and executives made frantic calls. But the real action was at the head table. Marcus, his face contorted in a mask of fury and desperation, was grabbing Serafina by the arm. We have to go, now! Serafina, in a state of shock, could only nod. As they tried to make their escape, a gauntlet of whispers and stares followed them. The very people who had fawned over them an hour before now looked at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. They were no longer a power couple. They were a scandal, a cautionary tale. As they reached the grand entrance, a swarm of reporters alerted by anonymous tips descended upon them. The questions were brutal, shouted over the pop of flashbulbs. Mr. Thorne, is it true the SEC is investigating you? Ms. Monroe, were you aware the gifts you received were from stolen funds? Is your marriage over? Marcus shoved his way through the pack, his face a thundercloud. Serafina, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror, stumbled behind him. The red dress that had seemed so victorious now looked garish, the dress of a scarlet woman caught in the act. The diamonds at her throat seemed to mock her each facet, reflecting the ugly flashing lights of her public disgrace. She thought she had won. She had played the game and claimed the king, but she had never once considered the quiet, unassuming queen who had just checkmated them all. The grand doors of the Met swung shut behind Marcus and Serafina, but there was no escape. The street was a chaotic circus of flashing lights and shouting reporters. A black town car, summoned by a panicked text, pulled up to the curb, and they scrambled inside the doors, slamming shut on the cacophony. Inside the car, the silence was more deafening than the noise outside. The adrenaline of the escape gave way to the cold, stark reality of their situation. Marcus was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Serafina was huddled against the far door, as if trying to distance herself from him, from the entire mess. She had unclasped the Queen's gambit, and it now lay on the seat between them, a glittering, venomous snake. What did you know? Marcus finally snarled, turning on her. His voice was low and menacing. No. What did I know? Serafina shot back her shock, giving way to a rising tide of fury and fear. I knew nothing about embezzled funds. You told me it was a discretionary bonus pool. You told me everything was legitimate. You never asked questions. He accused, his face twisting with rage. You just took the gifts, the trips, the apartment. You loved it. You loved the money, and you loved showing it off. She screamed, the carefully polished veneer of her sophistication stripped away, revealing the raw, desperate ambition beneath. You loved having me on your arm, this brilliant, beautiful woman you'd conquered. I was your trophy. Well, congratulations, Marcus. Your trophy just turned into state's evidence. The argument spiraled into a vortex of bitter accusations and panicked denials. The trust between them, always a fragile thing built on mutual ambition and desire, evaporated completely. He saw her now not as his partner, but as a liability, a witness. She saw him not as her powerful protector, but as the man who had dragged her into a federal investigation, ruining the career she had fought so hard to build. By the time the car pulled up to the curb of the luxury apartment he had bought for her, an apartment now tainted as a fruit of criminal activity, they were no longer allies. They were two cornered animals ready to turn on each other to survive. Meanwhile, back at the gala, Catherine was holding court. The initial shockwave had subsided, replaced by an electric buzz of awe and respect. The very people who had pitied her an hour ago now approached her with a newfound deference. She was no longer just the dignified wife. She was a formidable power player, a strategist who had executed one of the most brilliant and ruthless corporate takedowns the city had ever seen. Eleanor Vance appeared at her side, a small, satisfied smile on her face. The SEC confirmed they've received the package. They're seeking a warrant to freeze all of Thorn Capital's primary assets by morning, she murmured, and Sterling Hale just won the bid at a significant premium. You, my friend, are now a very, very wealthy woman in your own right. It was never about the money, El-Catherine said, taking a sip of champagne. Her hand was perfectly steady. It was about the principle. Her moment of triumph was interrupted by a figure striding towards her, pushing through the crowds with a singular, furious purpose. It was Marcus. He had evidently dropped Serafina off and come back a desperate, foolish, last-ditch attempt to confront her. He stopped before her, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The guests around them fell silent, backing away to give them space, turning the area into a makeshift arena. Why, he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. After 10 years, why do this? Why destroy everything? Catherine looked at him, and for the first time he saw no trace of the placid, accommodating woman he thought he knew. Her eyes were like chips of ice. You seem to be under a misapprehension, Marcus, she said, her voice calm and devastatingly clear. You think I did this because you cheated. You think this is the petty revenge of a scorned woman. You're wrong. Your affair was merely a symptom of your sickness, a sickness of arrogance. She took a small step closer, forcing him to meet her gaze. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed my family. You took my father's trust, my name, and the capital he provided, and you used it to build a monument to your own ego. You became reckless, a gambler, playing with other people's money, other people's lives. You thought my silence was weakness. You thought my dignity was ignorance. You mistook my patience for permission. He stood there, speechless, the sheer, cold logic of her words, cutting through his rage, leaving him exposed and utterly defeated. This wasn't about winning you back, she concluded, delivering the final fatal blow to his ego. I wouldn't take you back if you were the last man on Earth. This was a business decision. Thorn Capital had become a corrupt, unstable asset, and I, as a primary stakeholder, decided to liquidate. You, Marcus, were a bad investment, and I always cut my losses. She held his gaze for a moment longer, letting the full weight of his destruction settle upon him. He had lost his company, his reputation, his mistress, and his wife in the space of 30 minutes. He was nothing. Without another word, Catherine turned her back on him. She walked away, not looking back, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the room, a ruined man in the ruins of the life he thought he had built. He was no longer the center of the universe. He was just a black hole, and she had neatly, surgically excised him from her orbit. 3 months later, the New York City that Catherine Davenport surveyed from her new office was a different world. Or rather, she was viewing it through a different lens. Her office was not in a Park Avenue penthouse, but in a beautifully restored Soho loft, the headquarters of the newly established Davenport Foundation for Emerging Artists. The space was filled with light-exposed brick and challenging, vibrant new art. It was a space that looked to the future, not the past. The fallout from the charity night gala had been cataclysmic, just as she had planned. Marcus Thorne was buried in legal battles. The SEC investigation had uncovered years of fraud, leading to his indictment on multiple counts of embezzlement and securities fraud. Thorne Capital, a name once synonymous with ruthless success, had been dismantled, its viable assets absorbed by Sterling Hale, its reputation irrevocably shattered. He was a pariah, his name a whisper of a cautionary tale at the very cocktail parties he once dominated. Seraphina Monroe had fared no better. Faced with potential criminal charges as a material witness and recipient of illicit funds, she had agreed to cooperate with the prosecution against Marcus. Her career at Sterling Hale was over, her reputation in tatters. She had vanished from the social scene, reportedly moving back to her hometown in the Midwest, the bright lights of Manhattan having burned her down to ash. The Queen's Gambit necklace sat in an evidence locker at the DA's office, its glitter extinguished. Catherine had divorced Marcus with quiet, ruthless efficiency. Her legal position was unassailable. She waived any claim to his remaining personal assets, which were negligible after legal fees and fines taking only what was originally hers. Her family trust, her inheritance, and the immense profits from the sale of the tech subsidiary. She had walked away not just intact, but more powerful than she had ever been. Eleanor Vance sat across from her at a large reclaimed wood table that served as Catherine's desk, sipping an espresso. "The DA is offering him a plea deal," Eleanor said, scrolling through a document on her tablet. 10 years, eligible for parole in 7. If he refuses, they'll go to trial and push for the maximum of 25. Catherine looked out the window at the bustling street below. "He'll take the deal," she said without hesitation. "Marcus is a coward. A trial would mean a public airing of every single dirty secret. He couldn't bear the humiliation." And Seraphina Eleanor asked, "She'll get a slap on the wrist. Probation, maybe. She'll testify that she was a pawn manipulated by a powerful man," Catherine mused. In a way, she's not wrong. She was a pawn, just not in the game she thought she was playing. There was no triumph in her voice, no gloating. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a complex problem solved, of a balance restored. Her revenge had not been a fiery, passionate act. It had been a cold, calculated restoration of order. She hadn't lowered herself to his level. She had simply removed him from hers. "Are you happy?" Kath Eleanor asked, her voice soft. Catherine turned from the window, a genuine, unburdened smile gracing her lips for the first time in a long time. It was a smile that reached her eyes, making them shine. "I'm at peace, Elle," she said. "I spent 10 years as a curator for someone else's life, maintaining the collection, polishing the exhibits. I was living in a museum of a marriage. Now, I'm building my own gallery." She gestured around the room at the bold canvases and challenging sculptures. A young unknown artist whose work she was sponsoring was explaining his piece to a group of visiting students in the corner. The loft buzzed with creative energy, with potential, with new beginnings. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Gregory Abernathy. It was a simple picture of his son William, standing on the university campus, grinning from ear to ear, with a caption. "He made the dean's list." "Thank you." Catherine smiled and typed back a simple reply. "Excellence deserves to be rewarded." She had not destroyed Marcus's world out of hatred for him. She had dismantled it out of love for something greater, the legacy of integrity her family had built, the future she wanted to create, and finally the deep, abiding respect she had found for herself. She was no longer Catherine Thorne, the wife of a titan. She was Catherine Davenport, a patron of the arts, a force in her own right, a woman who had faced betrayal not with tears, but with a strategy. And as the afternoon sun streamed into her new life, she knew with absolute certainty that she had won more than just a battle. She had won back her own story. Catherine Davenport, Thorne's story is a testament to the fact that the most devastating revenge isn't loud and explosive, but quiet, intelligent, and impeccably planned. She didn't just get even. She redefined the entire game. While Serafina and Marcus were focused on the short-sighted victory of a public affair, Catherine was playing chess, seeing 10 moves ahead and orchestrating a checkmate that dismantled an empire and reclaimed her own life. She proved that true power isn't about who is standing in the spotlight at any given moment, but who has the strength and foresight to control the light switch. What did you think of Catherine's intricate plan? Was it a masterstroke of justice or a cold, calculated act of destruction? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have ever witnessed a moment where the underestimated underdog turned the tables so completely, share your story. And if you love tales of intricate revenge and powerful comebacks, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who would appreciate a good story, and subscribe for more content just like this.